Oh, hello everyone, and welcome to the Amusing Panda live stream, your musing and amusing source for all things War Machine. Thank you everyone in the audience for being here, and thank you to our special guest, Mr. Ryan Chiraboga of Spell Rack, friend of the show. How you doing, Ryan?
I'm good, Alex. How about yourself?
Not bad. Still, it didn't quite rise to the level of con crud, but I definitely came out of Adepticon like not feeling 100%, and that's still sticking with me. Like I've still got a bit of a sore throat, still run down, but
I did not end up with that. Instead, I ended up with like an extreme hunger to go play games. And work got so backed up for me over that weekend and then in this last week that I haven't played a game since then, which I'm super bummed about. And so
that's punishing.
I've been craving games and wanting to change my lists and having new knowledge of the meta, right? You just want to jump back into everything, and I haven't had the chance. So
yeah. Oh man. Well, you're gonna get games in a few days here because we got the San Diego Beach Brawl coming up this weekend.
Yep. And I am originally a San Diegan, and so
nice.
It'll be nice to go back home. Yeah, I'm gonna stay with my folks and borrow their car so I don't have to pay for Ubers and stuff. So that's convenient. So no hotel, no car fees. Just a plane ticket in the event.
Perfect. Yeah. So just for anybody out there who's in the audience that happens to be in the area or, got a bit of a wild hair, 2 more slots have opened up at the San Diego Beach Brawl. So this event was previously sold out, but we do have drops for 2 more people. If you can be in San Diego this weekend, be there.
Yeah, I'm super excited for it. It looks like a really good group. Certainly competitive without being a total Shark Tank. And so I think approachable. We have a lot of good personalities, I think, in the group. Think pretty highly of the local metas that'll be there. And so, good first experience for anybody or just in general.
And we got another friend of the show, David, in the chat. He's going to be there with us. Super excited for that. It's a big pool of representation. We got the Texans, we got a bunch of Arizonans. I'm seeing Ryan McCoyne coming out. I'm seeing Dan Hojnacki coming out. We got the Pacific Northwest represented. I think I even saw there's some wild attendance for this thing. But yeah, we are excited for the Beach Brawl, but we're actually here tonight to talk about Adepticon. You had some excellent coverage of that, which I would implore everyone to go and watch. Particularly your post-event list breakdowns for the finalists, Andy, Bev, and Routh. Yep. Particularly your episode with Andy had me seriously rethinking my Firequill list. Obviously his performance speaks for itself, but for me, like really listening to him get into the nitty-gritty of his decisions in the list has definitely had me take a second look. So, for anybody who hasn't yet, go and check those out.
It is always nice. It's funny, we all play the same game with the same rules, obviously, but everybody has their own takes and personalities and play styles. And you can look at a list, and sometimes you look at a list and you're like, why is this in here? Like, this doesn't make sense. This is bad. This is garbage. I don't like this model. And then you listen to somebody walk through their specific rationale for why it's in there, and it solves a specific problem that you haven't encountered or thought of. And it's just amazing how many different ways you can slice and dice this game. It's really nice to have the shared perspectives.
Yeah. We were talking about this in the pre-show that it's a good time for War Machine heretics. Before Adepticon, Andy and I had had a long-awaited beef cast to talk through our different philosophies on Brine Bloods. His clearly carried the day.
through a Shark Tank, through a really really rough gauntlet of players. I mean,
Yeah.
every game he played was a top tier player.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Just looking at yeah, as you say, his specific rundown was like absolutely grueling.
Yeah.
But yeah, you know, speaking of War Machine Heresy, you're on a bit of a back and forth in the Dust community. Tell us about what you brought and your thought process going into this meta moment prospectively. I know I know the weekend was challenging for you for some not on the table reasons, but I'm
Yeah.
curious as to like what your personal calls were and the basis for making those calls. Did we see double phantasm again?
So list one was Seraphil Double Phantasm. And that list was born out of really at the start of the year. I looked at the game and I thought, okay, there's a lot of powerful range lists out there, right? The January update brought a significant reduction in ranges, and some guns got a little bit more expensive, and rats obviously went down, but we all lost the spell rack, and so everybody lost their range defense. And I was looking at Kane and Firequill and Kishtar and all that stuff, and I'm just okay, this is spooky. And so I really like Seraphil Double Colossal. They're both defense 15 to range attacks and spells. And then that feat is pretty gnarly. And so that was list one. And then I've been trying to solve for what can't that list play into. And theoretically, it's Shard and Old Umbre. And that's actually a pretty rough pairing to try to solve with a second list, I find. They're two very diverse and powerful factions. So I ended up running Moraine with a bunch of Soulless spam with Void Engines. And my theory was that I could feed my opponent's Soulless models every turn, turn them into whites, and then the next turn they have to kill the whites and more Soulless, and it's just too much to grind through. And my theory was incorrect, and I played it poorly, and that's on me for bringing a list that I thought had a sound theory but wasn't actually there.
Right. Wait, and that's often a trap that shows up like that. You know, I've walked into this a ton of times, like really trying to figure a second list. You know, because your primary list is like really really good, and then like you know if the trying to cover Old Umbre in and of itself is super difficult because the faction can be built so many ways and you're having to answer so many threats. And then, you know, it turns into a bear trap really, really fast when you need to cover something else. Like I've run into this problem with Scorn and a bunch of others where like I lock in on a primary and then the secondary is like, this is supposed to be answering some other things in theory, but like it actually just gets dumpstered way too often.
Yeah, and one of my things, like Old Umbre aside, Shadow Flame, what I didn't really think about is how important ambush has become, and those stupid little skinks. They're with the stalkers, right? Is that what they're called?
Yeah. The Ursat's Daughters of the Flame.
The little stealth guys with the two knives. Yeah, okay.
Oh no, yeah, they're straight up Daughters of the Flame. They're just dragon
yes.
ninjas.
I get it now. Yeah, okay, now I get your reference in your joke. Okay, sorry. But I was parking just a little piddly unit off on the side, and like a unit of hunters, right, that have guns, and then that immediately collapses. And I was thinking, like, these guys are in the back, they're in the corner, they're safe, no issues. But with ambush and a lot of Shard players taking 2 units of those guys, I was approaching the game wrong in a sense there, and that made that really really difficult.
It's interesting that those the stalkers have come into their own as a bit of a staple for Shadow Flame, because like last year they were almost nowhere to be seen. Jake was running them sometimes. You'd see them every now and again, but like they were not a mainstay by any stretch of the imagination.
No, and they're the quick fling stalkers they're really really efficient. So I'm gonna put out another episode this week that kind of breaks down all the ambush units in the game and the scenarios and go over that stuff. But 6 points for defense 14 with 2 melee attacks. Turns out when they're all by themselves trying to take a flag or a 40 is an amazing unit.
Right. Yeah. And that's one of the odd things about ambush units. Producer Keith is a big proponent of commandos who lean in the offensive direction. But generally, I find if you're looking at ambush units, your defensive stats are actually first order of the day. You see this with Andy using boarding crew, which are, also heavily defensively skewed. He said he doesn't even count on them to make attacks. He just wants them to stand places. And at a slight premium, you get this unit of ninjas that if they get to untap into, say, another single wound infantry unit after they've come on and after they've done their scenario jamming, the defense 14 is a big deal. The unit they jam may not even meaningfully kill them, and they'll kill them right back.
I've even started to consider, do I need Kruger standing on a flag in the back? If it's a flag, right? If it's a 40, it's different. But if I'm looking at committing 6 points to holding this spot, Kruger will absolutely slam another unit. And so I wonder if he needs to be my 6 points that I park in the back, and he does nothing all game except make sure I don't lose on scenario.
Right, which is a quite different use for him. Usually Kruger is like, an ICBM model. Like he's fire and forget, does tremendous damage, and then disappears. Using him as a much more reserve piece would be a very interesting metagame evolution. Which I guess is the topic of tonight's discussion. I think we talked about it, around the WTC last year, that we've sort of settled into a yearly rhythm of like spring is the season of development and playing around with new toys. Summer is the refinement season, like the builds start to mature. The wild things in the earlier part of the year start to filter out as like what's long-term viable versus what's not. And then, fall, we get into a bit of a perfection phase, although I hesitate to say perfection because you and I both played in Mark II, which was like basically, a straight up and down, like this meta doesn't change much. Like maybe there's a substantial change every 2 years. And, toward the end in like 2016, we started to get to like really mature meta. Like here's tier 1, here's the things that counter tier 1. Don't play anything below this.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I mean, Mark II, to be clear, right? Mark II didn't have balance updates. There were no minor updates. Mark II only saw new models released, right? When Colossals were released, that was a big deal. And so it was new releases that changed things. God, I remember. Anyway, regardless, the cadence was totally different. You really got to season your lists over the course of a year or two. It's much more vibrant now.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it means we don't get to that same settled state. And I certainly do have like a bit of romance in my heart for like the deep metagame where we start to get into solution space. But like we were talking about earlier, I do enjoy when the game is a good time for heresy. And for experimenting around and for having, variant ideas that get, proved out over the course of the year, and then you reset and you try again. As far as the reset, the last big metagame snapshot, the last event that was like close to Adepticon size was right at the start of the year with Captain Con. There were a lot of familiar faces in the top 8 of Captain Con versus Adepticon, but Captain Con definitely looked like an early meta environment. There was a lot of wild experimentation, a very different faction breakdown in the top portion. And, you know, I think sort of the big staple was the early dominance of Gunlines. Captain Khan finished with a Lilith v Kishtar finals, but there was Kane and Firequill and like the who's who of premium shooters. Where are we now with Gunlines? Is this something that you think is going to be forever for 2026, or is this something we're going to see start to fade away?
My opinion now is, and let me just give a strict example really quickly, because I think Gunlines are still here, and I still think they have to be appropriately planned for. One of my locals, Max, who's been on Spell Rack a couple of times, and he's been pretty darn successful in a lot of events now.
Yeah, I got to go out of my way to get him on here.
Yeah, he played Kane in his Storm Legion, and on the weekend he had really good showings, but despite the weakness of Storm Legion. Point is, one of his matchups he played against Dusk, and I've kind of trained him to not drop Kane into Dusk because we have so many anti-gun resources. His opponent didn't bring the Void Engines and all the tools that I always bring, but he defaulted to playing his second list, and he lost. He got trumped pretty bad.
Mm.
Then he got to play the same person again the next day, and he and I had talked about it, and I was like, well, could his list handle Kane? And he was like, oh, I don't think so. And I was like, well, I think your choice is, can my opponent handle Kane? Yes, no. If no, play Kane. If yes, play your off list. So he played the same person the next day, played Kane, and shot him off the table easily. And so for as much as Kane is statistically a terrible warcaster, right? He's sub 50. He probably averages 45, 46 between Gravediggers and Storm Legion. He's still a very powerful tool. And I feel like Firequill and some of these other range casters fall into that same category. And so, yeah, I could see people start to move away from Gunlines. I could see people meaningfully start to do it. But I worry that still opens them up to the person that does bring Kane and just says, yep, I can shoot that off the table. Now I'm going to go do that.
Right. Well, this is, I mean, I think there's meaningful and substantial differences between, you know, because I put together a list of like the casters that are most dominant in the gun space. And we got Firequill, we got Lilith, we got Helith, we have Kane, Kishtar, and Borisyuk. And these three casters differ in a lot of ways, but like, you know, like with the meta having moved on for a couple of months and Andy still winning and Firequill still being quite a decisive part of his plan, like I was even like getting a little dubious on Firequill, and I played him in back-to-back league games on Sunday. I'm like, oh, if the opponent is weak to shooting, this caster just gets to go to town on them. Like these games were not even close. Wonderful, lovely opponents, but like, my God, when you're not prepared to be shot at, it's bad news.
Guns are very, very powerful because people just, you have to deliberately take anti-gun tech, right? It's not very often that you whoops into it. You don't have the spell rack anymore. And so it's a real weakness. You can lose at list pick.
Right. I just a tangent real quick. M Ultra or Multra chiming in on Kane. He's only that low because lesser skilled players make mistakes with him. I think that's a not unrealistic take, because my God, if you screw up with Kane, it's so easy to get him killed.
Yeah, and I think I did have one Kane game on the weekend that I played against, and he accidentally left himself open. He went to hide himself, and he put a gun mage in front of him in Gravediggers, and I just slammed the gun mage over him. He
didn't have heightened reflexes up, thought he was safe, and
because he thought he was fully in the back and no problems, and so it kind of was what it was. But you know, he's totally right. I do think anybody that's playing Kane, I learned this lesson back in the day playing some Crixcasters or Haley 2, right? Haley 2 only lost when you were 2 inches too far forward. Otherwise, she was just super OP. And so you just learn to keep her 2 inches back and you never lose. And that kind of feels like how Kane should be. I'm not saying Kane is at that level of never lose, but he should always be 2 inches further back than you think he should be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that like Brandon is a big champion of, and like I ran a bunch of Kane earlier this year. And I'm really coming around to the idea of the list archetype is broadly called selfish Kane. It's Kane with a bunch of things to keep him alive, and then a bunch of independent modules that demand nothing from him.
Yeah.
I think it's a really strong way to build him.
Yeah.
But go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, and that's just Kane, right? He's just one component of that ranged meta. I do think, I mean, because he can pick up a Colossal by himself, and how many Warcasters can say that? Whereas the rest of his list doesn't have to be a complete and total gunline. Whereas your Fire Quills and your Kishtars and other stuff, it's a lot more diversified guns. It's very, very different.
Yeah. Wait, that's I think because there's two conversations that I think are worth having. One is your diversification level, and two is donkey space, which is I don't know that was coined by David Serlin, but he was certainly the first person that brought it to my attention. Let's have the donkey space conversation first. You've run into the concept of donkey space, right?
But no, you have to define it because I loved the reference in your notes, but I had never heard of it before.
Oh, okay. So donkey space is a term coined for solvability, and when a game is like quote unquote solvable. Chess is theoretically solvable, Go is theoretically solvable, but they haven't been yet, as far as I know. Rock, paper, scissors is theoretically solvable. Where like you rotate rock and paper and scissors, and your tie rate is 1/3, your loss rate is 1/3, and your win rate is 1/3. This is supposedly playing optimal, because varying from this can get you in trouble. Except somebody can do the good old Bart Simpson, like nothing beats rock, and just throw rock every single time. They'll actually pick up a pretty disproportionate win rate against people, who they'll pick up a disproportionate win rate against people who run the optimal strategy. So in order to beat the just rock guy, you have to descend into this space of suboptimal play strategies. To do weird things to fight people who are also being weird. So I mean, in like the much more staid, Mark II meta, there were the casters who were the top, and there was the second tier casters who were good into the tier 1 casters, but not as great objectively. And then beneath that, there was a dark sea of dark horses. And every now and again, you would get somebody dark horsing who just flummoxed this very straightforward meta. But as far as this affects the game we're dealing with now, I think what you said was particularly interesting. Like the shooting meta was so powerful at the opening, and it remains quite powerful, especially if where we are in the season of developing rather than perfecting. If people start to drift away from the shooting answers, somebody can absolutely punish them. So like, do you see us headed for a meta of donkey space based on the weekend?
I think a lot of people, so there are let me try to maybe draw on an analogy of throwing rock the whole time, right? Like You could say, I'm not going to bring an anti-gun list. I'm going to be plan dodge. My plan is to just dodge it, right? I'm just going to not play against Kane. And if I do play against Kane, I will not podium. And if I skip over the Canes, I will podium. And that is a totally reasonable strategy to go into an event with, right? Especially if it's a regional event and you know there are not any dominant Kane players. You could do the same thing for Old Umbre or Shard or, you know, whatever. If the plan is dodge and your lists are better into the rest of the meta because of that, yeah, you could totally throw everything for a loop. It's the range meta I have a harder time doing that with, just because it is diversified across 5 or 6 different factions,
right,
and different casters.
Yeah, there's a lot of factions running like top tier range threats, you know. So it's gonna be hard to keep yourself out of it in a solo event. It might be less hard though in a team event, and that very well could be like, you know, we see donkey space strategies sometimes emerge very strongly in WTC. I mean, I even remember like 2019, like, okay, I'm playing a Scorn pair. I straight up lose if I see Crucible Guard. No contest, no chance of victory. I'm donezo.
Yeah.
And then my team generously manufactured no Crucible Guard for me all weekend, and it was a good weekend.
Well, and even to riff on that, when I won the WTC, it was with a dark horse.
Mm-hmm.
I went out there with Goreshade 2. Nobody was playing Goreshade 2. And I was, you know, everybody thought that they had a traditional Crix drop. Yeah, this is my Crix drop. And then Goreshade 2 broke that. Mm-hmm. And so people would pair into me thinking that I was a solid win. And every time it flipped against them. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I mean, you can go into those events planning to dodge the thing you don't like, and you can plan to try to get the things that you like. And then where the math goes sideways is when you actually pick the thing that you thought you were going to dominate, and then it's a hard L, and you just lose that matchup, and then your pairing whole system is screwed. And that's what worked for us. Obviously, that was a long time ago. Metas have evolved, pairing systems have evolved, teams have evolved, but being able to fly in that face of that was huge.
Sure. There's an instance of like some of the game theory around War Machine is like eternal and survives metagame shifts, like the underlying dynamics. You know, in my discussion with Andy Bev, you know, he and I talked about like answering shooting from a Brian's perspective. And you know, he definitely carried the day, but I ran into a situation, I think at the team tournament, that Andy did not in his solos run. Which is I ran into a Kishtar Butcher pair. And you know, I've taken a very different approach to anti-shooting than Andy has, who is very much like, okay, here's my layered defenses, here's a million bazillion dudes. You don't get to compete with this, you know, because my technology is too strong. And I took sort of a different like win on the margins approach with Boggity Bomb. Like, we're gonna pressure threat range. We're gonna cross a critical armor breakpoint on the king, and we're gonna use that as leverage to drive the opponent off scenario. But like, you know, out here in the real game, like your opponent gets a say in the matchup you see too. So I was playing Eric Rydberg, and we talked after the game. And he's like, "Yeah, I looked at the pair, and I'm like, Kishtar can't kill that king, so it's Butcher all the time."
Yeah.
It was an interesting game because we were past that first layer of like, I'm going to do even split rock, paper, scissors versus I'm just going to throw a rock at you. You know, and I wonder, like, that's the real test of like, does a solution really solve for something? Does it solve for layer 1? Okay. Does it also solve for layer 2 when the Orgoth player looks at their pair and says, I see what you're doing here, and I'm gonna counter it. Now, Andy's an incredibly strong player and very, very clever. So I would be interested to see what he would do in that situation. But for me, like it was really nice because it was a situation I'd accounted for. And I mean, it kind of sounds like, Helith Soulless, got you into a sort of similar place. Like, okay, I've planned for layer 1. Oh crap, here comes layer 2.
In my case, layer 2 was ambush. But I could see where Butcher could break both of your lists, right? His list was intended to sustain, right, and win on scenario and play a little bit more grindy. And if Butcher has a decent feat turn into you, like, you say goodbye to your survivability. It doesn't matter.
Right.
That's tough. And then you guys are bringing units for him to kill, right? And so he has a chance to get blood quenched. And if he can kill the king and get some tokens on him, he might be untouchable. And that's rough. It's sort of a similar paradigm to what Ralph brought with his Necrofactorium and Decathus. And he just stacked up his souls and said, I'm in the middle of the board. You can't kill me. I'm going to kill anything you put within 13 inches of him or whatever it is. Very, very similar to Butcher in that case.
Boy, talk about somebody like just throwing rock all weekend and having it be absolutely the right metagame call. That's a hell of a list, and it's extremely unorthodox. Is that something you see having enduring legs, especially like, when Routh or an enterprising Crix player takes a look at this experience and says, okay, this creates a lot of problems for people. Now let's develop a partner for it that isn't just a meme.
And I did have a chance to talk to him.
Nice.
I talked to him a little bit before the finals and then after, and then some text messages after. So I did get good input from him. He built that list because he thought the range game was very strong and he wanted an answer to the range game. I think traditionally people are going to look at Sub-Zero and Shield Guards and Recursion, and they're just going to play this sort of grindy Shield Guard game. And he said, nah, I'm just going to jam you with meat and a caster that you can't kill. And so he answered the problem in just a different way than anybody else has ever answered the problem before. You're right. That list is going to become popular. Other people are going to play it. Necrofactorium players, I imagine, have been looking for a little bit of hope inside of their faction and inside of this meta. And here we have it.
Right.
And yeah, that's going to change everything. Your lists might have to change, because if that list starts to show up more often, you could either be playing Dodge Decathus or I can't shoot through this. Or you end up in list chicken, which is just pure chaos. Back to your theory.
Right. Well, that's interesting, and I think, having watched a fair number of your Meta Mondays over the last couple of months, like, boy, Necrofactorium has been looking for a hero, right? Especially since Kythos had his big fall off.
Yeah, and that's for everybody out there that's looking at lists and copying lists and stuff like that. Like, have at it, guys. Right? None of us play War Machine as much as we want to play, and none of us are playing into the perfect meta. You might have huge blind spots in what you play against, because you don't have local players playing Orgoth or Shadowflame or whatever it is. And so to borrow from the expertise of somebody else that's had a chance to grind these games, go steal those lists, try them, play them. If you want to change something, tune it and make it your own, but no shame in copying a list, especially if, like I said, somebody's had experience where you haven't been able to do that. Borrow their experience, go play some games.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. I think, man, there's always this impulse to be like, I want to be the creative genius. And it's like, well, nothing wins like winning. So, like, when favorites emerge, converge on it and, demonstrate brilliancy in the refinement process.
Yeah. Yeah, you can do something or change something that makes it your list, but don't beat your head up against a wall just because it has to be your unique list. If you're getting a lot of games in and you're grinding and you have that expertise and you enjoy that, then go do it. But also, I think looking at that list and the success of it and the way he played it, I feel like every Necrofactorium player over the next 60 to 90 days should be trying that out and seeing if they can make it part of their pair, and then that's going to change the meta, right? Because that is theoretically, I paralleled him to Butcher, but he's kind of a second Butcher list, right? It's a meaty list with an unkillable caster that can kill a lot, and if that starts running into gunlines are going to have to change,
right? Yeah, so this is I think for me one of the big looming questions is like, which gun lines are gonna survive the shift? They're never gonna go away entirely, but they're not all created equal. I mean, like we were talking about Kane earlier, and he is in no way pre-committed to run a gun line, although he shoots very well, and he's bringing Calamity, which is a debuff that particularly guns leverage exceptionally well, because it's this across the board thing that can be applied remotely, and you just want to, when you debuff, you want to leverage as much damage as possible at once, which usually says guns. But he's not wedded to it, and I think there's actually a lot of adaptability in Selfish Kane archetypes versus, I think, somebody that we saw not at all at Adepticon was Boris, who was, a lot of people started the year absolutely terrified of that man and his Mastodon, and now he's like nowhere to be seen. Or Blake Hooper won Captain Con with Kishtar. A lot of people call me crazy for this, but I think she's on her way out. And these two casters, what they have in common is they are the most pot committed around building around shooting. Kishtar is devoting between like 45 and 70 point battle group into guns, once you start factoring in the support. Boris is building almost 80 points in guns, versus, Kane is very, very flexible. In the outline, I put these in like extremely confusing terms, so I have like pepper ratings on them. But I think the milder end of the spectrum, the guys that are least pot committed, which in my opinion includes Firequill, Lilith, Kane, possibly Helith, that they seem to have the staying power. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is, I think when you asked how the meta is going to evolve and change and stuff, these are still very powerful casters, even when they're not running gun lines, right? Like you just said, Kane is case in point. He's a super solo. He can be your gun line, and the rest of your list can be melee. And so if there's 3 out of 4 Kane players are running pure gun lines, and then you're the 1 in 4 that's running actually a melee list with Kane as a scalpel, that also messes with pairings significantly. Kishtar can still move a heavy 6 inches and then it can charge in and hit something. And so if you want to just take is it a 12-point tyrant? Has the flail,
claw, and relentless charge.
Yeah. And so like if you just want to bring 3 of those with her and just throw one of them at your opponent every turn, and you can go take other efficient, meaty, sort of melee units there, as well as counterpunching pieces. That sounds like a really good list to me under the right circumstances. There are definitely other ways to play these casters. And yes, I think we will see some diversification, unless people stop taking anti-gun stuff. If we think guns are on their way down, it's the right time to be playing guns. It does feel very paper, rock, scissors to me.
Yeah. Well, this is where I think, the how committed they are starts to matter as a meta movement. Where Brine Bloods is a stable right now. I don't think you're going to see Firequill go anywhere over the next 6 months or so, or 7 months really remaining in the competitive year. And you know he's just one of the most potent casters in the roster. And then you have somebody like Lilith, Shadow Flame Shard does not suffer from roster constraints. Like they don't exactly have dead weight in their roster, but Lilith is really, really strong, and she doesn't have heavy commit. I mean, often what you're seeing with Lilith is like Hydrix, Aklis, maybe Skilla, the Wyvern, which diversifies your list enough that, like, okay, I'm not leaning into hard range threat, but if you want to play a standoff and dance game, like, I'm going to crush you on the back of my caster's superiority, couple of good quality guns. And then if you want to mix things up in melee, I'm only 40 points deep on a battle group, which is cheap for Shadow Flame.
Yeah.
And I have an incredibly solid beater that can mess you up. And I think it's actually the casters who clock in on the mild end of the spectrum that dictate you can never move away from gunline defense, because no amount of gunline defense is adequate to drive them out.
Yeah, and Lilith, I think, is certainly a unique turn on this. I think she takes less guns, to your point, and she can take more counterpunch. But her unique angle is the run and gun, right? So you can take her and two gun heavies. I say gun heavies, right? You're probably taking a Hydrix with a couple of ranged heads, and then you're taking another Hydrix with a melee option and maybe a ranged head, or you're probably taking a Wyvern with that spray. But she and the two heavies can both come up, kill something, move back. I specifically played against one opponent on the weekend who had a forest. And so all three heavies, or so I say three heavies, the two heavies and Lilith walk into the forest, kill something, back out of the forest. And then they have cloud walls. So even if they don't have the forest, they're in and out of cloud walls. The point is that she is, to your point, she's a very unique range caster. And she's harder to just like walk into and just say, too bad you don't have enough attacks to deal with me, is because she'll hit you in melee too.
Right. Yeah, and that was the only faction duplication in the top 8. Peyton Priest and Jake Van Meter, both running Shadow Flame, and they leaned really heavily on Lilith all weekend. Jake was 6 games of Lilith. Peyton was this 5 games of Lilith and 1 game of Curax. And both of them are like Aklis, Wyvern, and Hydrix. So relatively light battle group commit, and then a lot of attention to playing scenario, because that's also like, it's one thing to defend against a gun line, but you can't take forever to do it. You have to have a vector that you're proactively beating them on, and that's usually scenario, because they don't like to be forced to stand places. They like to do, like you said, like, oh, I've got a forest here, I'm just going to exploit this in line of sight denial, and like, I'm not taking a forward position, but you're losing pieces and you ain't doing anything to me. Traditionally, scenario is a counter to that.
Yeah, and that's where the ambush has come in, and it's a part of that approach that I didn't really think about. My list was intended to be very forward because I considered them to be very forward, and we're going to meet in the middle, and I'm going to have too many models. Well, now, even if I pressure you on scenario in the middle, you've got this darn flanking unit ambushing, and it slows me down just enough that you can get your attrition where you need it to be, that then you don't have to be running and gunning the entire game. You can be holding middle objectives, and then I lose on a longer game. That's where Lilith was really tough for me.
There's it's interesting because I was just looking through the top 8 again. There was a Kishtar in the top 8, Eric Akers, but
Mm-hmm.
he's also doing exactly what we were talking about. He's got a diversified battle group. So, okay, 2 tyrants, hunter, shredder, quad bolt thrower, jackal with the hunting rifle, and then that's it. He cuts the shooting, like the core shooting focus right off at 41 points. And then we've got Magnus and Invictus, which
Yep.
is an excellent scenario piece, completely autonomous, do their own thing. Barragers, which are an excellent scenario piece. These guys love to just sit on objectives and make you come to them. Execrators, superlative scenario piece. Like, he lent heavily against type, and it seems it really paid off.
And to your point, those units still have guns,
Mm-hmm.
but they are scenario pieces at the same time,
Exactly.
right? The barragers, especially having that repo 2, allows them to come out, shoot, and then repo back onto that objective. So they are holding the objective. They're hard to dig out, and they're doing damage while they do it. The execrators have those Thunderbolt range 10, POW 13 throws. Those guys are just wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
So he's still got a gun line, but yeah, he's able to commit more than you would kind of regularly expect.
Yeah. I guess of our boogeymen, what's your read on Helith and her place in the meta right now?
Helith, I feel like Helith is tough. Her win rate is atrocious if you look at the statistics, but she's kind of like Kane. She only has a 12-inch control area, and she doesn't have his 5-inch teleport. And so she's got to come out on feet turn, and when she feeds, she only gets 12 inches on that range. Her feet is very powerful, giving out that -2/-2, but then she dies. And so you do need to commit, kind of to your point about Kane, you need to protect him, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
I think Helith probably needs like a unit of guardians at all time to be her shield guards, or you also need to body block with stuff. Then, so I think she can still be very, very powerful like she was last year, but she feels weak enough herself. Her feet also used to give +2 defense and armor. That was nerfed to just being +2 armor now.
Mm-hmm.
So on her feet turn, she's a 15-17. Nothing special there.
Right.
And so you really have to protect her. My issue at this point this year is I haven't found a list that I really like with her yet. So many of these other factions have different levels of support for their jacks and war beasts. You take her because she gives them true sight. And so now I can ignore clouds. It allows me to see through stealth. Whereas other people can do that just with like a Shadowflame Shard, right? Their Fury Management support unit, they can give out eyeless sight. And so you have to lean so heavily into some of that gunline stuff with her because it's our only way to deal with it. And I just, the lists feel clunky to me. So I like Helith. I still like Helith. I think there is a list out there for her that works. But I feel like there's a lot of times where she loses the range on range matchup. And so you can't accidentally drop her into something that's a range superior list because you'll lose. And then she's just so weak herself. She's in a tough spot.
Right. And that defense hit to feet, especially in the face of the lethality drop was actually pretty substantial. She does feel like a less army-wide robust protector and deliverer. Whereas before she was like, yeah, Hellas army gets her every time. The spell formerly known as Phantasm is great shooting defense, but only on one piece, and it's usually Phantasm on a Phantasm.
Yep.
And that can, and it's only one Phantasm. That can start to like feel a little bit pigeonholed. Your battle group construction gets a little weird. Like, yeah, I definitely get like the clunky feeling. Sorry, go ahead.
No. I agree with you. Yeah, the phantasm, you can only protect it or her. It sort of becomes binary. And if you're protecting her, you're probably going to lose it. And it
Mm-hmm.
becomes hard. She just doesn't, she has some offensive tech and then just not enough defensive tech, I feel like, to survive right now.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think, and this is not necessarily a great place to be, but one of her strongest tricks is like, oh, you pulled ahead on attrition, or you dumpstered my colossal despite my best efforts. I'm just gonna take some weapon master shots at you, and you might die. It's always nice to have a chip in a chair, but it does not feel good to have chip in a chair be your plan.
Right, right. And even then, she is a POW 10. She can throw 4 dice at it, but she starts at 10, not Kane's 12. And she has to spend 2 focus to get the range 12. And so it just, you only get the 2 shots. It gets hard with her,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
her individual threat.
Right. So, so I think we're at like, 6 or 5 or 6, sort of shooting boogeymen, and it seems like about half are gonna fade away, or at least have to diversify as people start to figure out, like solutions, or at least adequate defensive measures to force them off of, plan A. um I will say, when it comes to faction makeup, uh, I'm seeing 8 Shadow Flame players, 8 Brine Blood players, 8 Dusk players, 7 Gravedigger players. It seems to me like Old Umbre has very strong representation in here. It seems to me that there's a lot of reaction to the lessons of Captain Con going on, and a lot of people, like as you were saying about Dusk at the start of the episode. You have the capability to bring void engines, and bring somebody like Sirafel, who is posturing very aggressively on scenario, can manufacture some very high defenses against ranged attacks, and just exert that push off pressure. Um, like Thorga Boomhowler is one of the most common Brine Bloods casters. Kane is very difficult to assassinate with range, such that in Kane v Kane mirror matches, they don't even try.
Sure.
um, it seems that this was a field that was very much in reaction to, season 1 of this year's 3 seasons. What are your thoughts on our faction breakdown, and how that shook out?
Overall, I felt like it did kind of come in, in the coming, or in the weeks leading up to the event. Shard, Dusk, Orgoth had been really good. Brine Bloods had been really good. The win rates on Infernals were still really high, but obviously they're a smaller number there. And so, really, I guess my surprise was that while you said there was one Orgoth in the top, I expected to feel their presence a little bit more. I knew Shard was really good, and I guess what I underestimated is how many really good players we have here in the States and showing up to the event that were playing Shard. Right, there were a lot of sharks playing Shadowflame Shard. But at the same time, I didn't expect to feel Brine Bloods as much as it was there. But a lot of players hopped onto Brine Bloods. Right? Dan Riker was there playing Brines. And that was new. And then there was somebody else that had picked up Brine Bloods, and I'm just forgetting now. But and so the meta felt kind of as I expected it to, but I felt like the levels and the allocations were a little bit different.
Yeah. Yeah.
Less Old Umbre than I expected, I guess. Maybe is another one.
I definitely wasn't expecting a field exactly like this. I do know a lot of Old Umbre players at the start of the year were really feeling the heat from the gun meta, particularly a lot of the old early counters were Morozov, and then, against hyper built Kishtar, it's like, oh, Morozov doesn't actually defend against this.
Yeah, it's too much.
As Tyrants on the Field mentions, Eric Akers' list was built to break Morozov, and it seems to be built to break it on a different vector than than Oops All Guns Kishtar does, and do so in a more long-term sustainable way. Another old Umbre story. I was going 3-0 until until I hit my my good friend and former WTC teammate Jacob Cooper in round 3. We had played each other earlier this year in Portland, and we had a Firequill v Bodan showdown that went my way. Jake shows up with an Aslanov list with a Gorger and a bunch of bears and stuff like that. I'm like, there's no way I can shoot this off the table. He puts it down and like, oh, you out threat Boggity Bomb too. I guess I just lose. And he crushed me. He's like, yeah, I spent 2 months thinking about our game in Portland and how bad Firequill it was. So I put this together specifically for you.
Well, you left your mark. That's absolutely certain. And so congratulations on getting your comeuppance, I guess.
Yeah.
That is the other thing that like scares me in old Umbre is, yes, Morozov is the traditional anti-gunline caster, but Maxim is still fantastic. And it is a different layering of approach, right? It's not the stealth and the shield guards and the bears and then the armor on the bears. It's just defensive formations. And it's just too much armor. And then if you do have not a full gun line and you try to counter into him, then you end up next to the starved and he gets another 2 armor, or the bears gain unyielding. And it's that layering of armor that you need in that Orgoth pairing. You need that butcher to crack that much armor, or you have to pressure scenario in an unimaginable way. And so I've said it all year. I still think Aslanov is tremendous, and I'm shocked by the win rates and the play rates that I've seen out of him. But I'm still super scared of him.
Yeah, because the Europeans are really hot on him, but America not so much, even though he posts really good results.
Yeah.
I think a lot of old Umbre players starting this year in like existential terror about the emergent like February era gun meta are actually finding their way through pretty solidly. And like, I don't even think it's wrong to like, to go with a pair like Morozov, Aslanov, and just like, well, everything defends against guns, and I'm just going to arbitrage on advantage. And then these armies also have very different offensive profiles. But I've also heard old Umbre players like they are starting to feel metagame freedom to the point where I heard multiple old Umbre players talk about, I'm prepping for the mirror. You don't prep for the mirror unless you think you're on a winner here into the whole field.
Yeah, that makes sense. I to your point, yeah, you're right. I feel like even Yana, I think, has good gameplay into guns. She's very fast. She can be very durable, and she does have wind wall.
Yeah. She has the old Vlad 1 spell.
Yeah. So anything within 3 inches, non-magical guns automatically miss. And that one can also be a very good tool. And where I think old Umbre is going to thrive, and to your point, if they're worried about the mirrors, if lists go into more of a hybridy approach, like I mentioned earlier, where they're doing some guns, some melee, old Umbre is really hard to commit into a melee, just with the armor and again with the starved. that's tough. And so I do feel like you're either probably better with a pure gunline list and you just try to shoot them off the table, because committing into them is going to be tough.
Right. Yeah, and it's also challenging, when you are staring down somebody like Aslanov, who, for instance, who is like, I'm gonna ram this stuff down your craw, and if you're not ultra hard committed to shooting, you're not gonna get through all of it. And by the way, I'm gonna, control you on scenario, and all the scenario elements are behind me.
Yeah, and Aslanov for me still has the I went first. Okay, run, feet, run. And you're feeded into their deployment zone and your opponent can't get away from you, and then you murder them.
Which is exactly what Jake did to me.
That's tough.
Yeah. It's boy, that roll to win the game is a rough one.
When it's Aslanov, yeah, I feel like it's you definitely need to be going first there. Which is another thing, and I know this necessarily wasn't on your hit list, but I feel like so many people at Adepticon chose to go second. It very much seems that I think I lost every single roll to decide who goes first or pick sides and all that stuff on the whole weekend. And I found myself going first a lot. And I was like, what? It occurred to me halfway through. I was like, why do I keep going first? And I was like, I haven't won a roll yet. And everybody's picking second. So they're taking side, which is obviously it's always a big deal for terrain. But in this scenario packet, it's a big deal in the packet. Getting to decide where your objectives are and all that stuff. And it's just, I don't know. It was a big deal to me to have that.
So is that your natural inclination for you is going second the preference? Because I think there's a deep layer here.
I'm much more of a 50-50. It kind of depends. And I feel like a lot of people were just windmill slamming go second. I'm overstating that, but it felt much less of a this is a decision, and I go second. So
right, I think so. Yeah, I generally tend to be pretty situational about it. But I noticed I was also going first a lot on the weekend, and I didn't win all my rolls. But man, the games I went second against Jake, and that was super bad for me. I played against Brandon the next round. I was like, I got distracted and I'm like, oh yeah, I won the roll off. I'll go first. I'm remembering partway through his turn one. I'm like, oh crap, this is a matchup I actually want to go second in. I forgot.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I was perfectly happy going first on many of these. And I think there's the scenario packet does have a lot of scenarios where a lot of points can be scored. And on scenarios like Two Fronts, actually maintaining control of the flag can be quite influential. That said, Adepticon, the terrain pieces were quite large, and there weren't necessarily a world of terrain pieces on each board, like often 8 or 9. Versus if you're playing on a lot of boards with like the 2.5D Terrainiac sets, those pieces skew much smaller, and you can often be used to playing on a board with like 14 to 16 pieces. So on certain board environments, the flags become much more live, and the second player decision becomes much more impactful. I think almost every game I played with a flag, like me and my opponent went to set it up as like, oh, all these are either predestined or like, this one side has one more decision than the other.
Yeah. I definitely had a couple of cases where I may have been able to put a flag in one of two locations. And this, again, I'm going to go back to my mistakes against the Shadow Flimshard players with ambush is being able to force your opponent onto a side of the table that compels their flag into one piece of terrain that's on the side where your ambush unit can get to can be a major factor in what your role is. So for you as the Brine Bud player, right, because you also have a really good defense 14 ambush unit,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like being able to force your opponent into that sticky situation is very powerful.
Right. So, hmm. So there's a twist on this. And you know, I see Samar Brander in the chat. I see Jay Beatnik in the chat. I see M Ultra in the chat. Um there's uh there's there's a dynamic with scenario that I could be wrong about this, but my intuition is not a lot of people have cottoned on to. And going first on these scenarios is not nearly as bad as it seems. Because you have the option to like eat board space, and sure you don't deploy as far, but like, you know, you in many cases hold the initiative in the game, and you can come to your opponent's like scoring turn, particularly fault line. Fault line, it is not unheard of to score like 8 points on turn 2. It's super easy on that scenario to do. And like a mediocre turn for you is scoring 5 points. But, you know, when your opponent is typically like they take 2 and they score like 7 points, and then you take your retaliation as the first player and also score 7 points, like 7 points is a big number, but it's not actually backbreaking because of how live it is. Therefore, this new dynamic emerges where you run up the board and your opponent like dances around in the back, like, I'm going to be careful and set up and be ready for scenario. And then, you know, you come onto your second turn as first player, your opponent's going to get first crack on scoring, and you're like, I'm going to back off. I'm going to make you stand on it. You're not going to get to charge me. I'm going, you know, if you want to take your panoply of points, I'm going to take all the models that you use to do it. So no, you stand on it. And that maneuver is surprisingly live in a lot of scenarios, especially when like at environments like Adepticon with their unique terrain set, where the flags are not nearly as much of a wild card. And in fact, my game against Eric Rydberg, we actually had this interesting dynamic where he put down Butcher, and my plan was to say to him, no, you stand on it. You know, he opted to come in, but we were talking it through afterward, and the response turned out to be like, you know, his response should have been, no, you stand on it. You know, you can get into this interesting game of deferring, but it's not always that the second player has an option to defer back. So, you know, I don't think people should be as uncomfortable with going first as they seem to be. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I don't mind going first. It doesn't. That's where I was surprised that people lean into the I'll go second, I'll go second, I'll go second a lot more than I expected.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like I said, for me, it's very coin flippy. In addition to your point about going first, I've played some games where I'm dusk, right? I'm fast, and so I have pretty good threat ranges, especially with something like Tyrus.
Mm-hmm.
So if I go first and I run, and you look up and you say, okay, what are your threat ranges? And I say, well, like everything's 14 and I can abyssal gate your jacks or whatever. And my opponent plays a little bit cagey. I've played scenarios where I'll run my entire army at him and I'll leave things on a handful of objectives. And so now your second player's second turn, you have to unjam my entire army and not lose on scenario immediately.
Right.
And that can be hard. And again, it's because if they give me that much leeway because my threat rangers are so far, they barely walk out of their 11-inch deployment zone. Maybe they're up like 3 inches or so. And if I jam properly, you might just win on turn 2 on scenario. That's kind of an extreme case. I don't expect that to work that often. It's very kind of case specific, but it's another point where player 1 does have the agency to go forward or back up, to your point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think a lot of old Umbre players are also operating in that kind of space, particularly like it weirdly matters a lot how much of your infantry is large based. You know, because even if your speed is like okay-ish, like speed 7 bears, their base size and their ability to reposition and stuff like that actually, like on your unpacking turn one play, winds up eating just so much territory you wouldn't think would be there. And like cats can run 13 or like, you know, walk 8, place 2, base size 2, repo 3, expand to cover the board, you know, under threat of Tyrus feet. You know, there's the like first player really does have 2 modes they can operate in. It's either no, you stand on it, or I'm going to stand on it and you have to risk losing on your 2.
Mm-hmm.
That's is that something that you think, I mean, we're talking about it now, but you know, if we're looking at, you know, where we were snapshot on this weekend, is this something you think is going to be discovered and re-enter the scenario rhythm? Like we check in, you know, maybe in a few months when Nova Open happens and we see this massive favor toward first, you know, is that something you see on the horizon?
I don't know. I mean, like I said, my expectation is that it's very balanced. Going first or second is fine. I think last year we saw a 53% win rate over the course of the year towards going first, right?
Mm-hmm.
Getting an extra, 53 to 47, you have a 6-point delta there on just a coin flip. That's a bummer. I need to double check what it is this year. But if it is a 50-50 and people just tend to be taking second, I think it's going to serve them 50-50. And so there's really no reason to deviate from that. And so I don't know if I see it swinging. If anything, it should come back to people being a little bit more strategic about one or the other instead of just taking second more often.
Mm-hmm. So this is going to be a weird, like a bit of a weird question, but you know, like you're sort of one of the premier data guys right now. And I always find there's an odd question. Like it lingers there in the background of so many discussions. Like, you know, okay, we see Kane with a sub 50% win rate, and you know, we've sort of talked about how that can happen, and we see like going first, going second, having these disproportionate win rates. But it's almost like, you know, in many of these questions, how to phrase this, you know, when old Umbre was just coming out last year, and they were a bit more juiced than they are now. I was talking with a friend of mine, and I was, you know, I was saying like, okay, this faction has a ridiculously high win rate, partially because a lot of the threats they put on you are super overwhelming in some regards. And, you know, like this faction is balanced at, you know, like the top table levels, but at the low and mid table levels, like it's just overawing. And the Gravediggers almost seem to have the opposite problem, where like Brandon and some other really dedicated Gravediggers players were, you know, tearing people up with the faction, but the faction's overall win rate was abysmal, you know, because there's this massive skill expression factor. And so like, I wonder when I look at these things, like we talk about, you know, the win-loss rates for casters or armies or turn order, and we can talk about the games, but then it's like, it's always there for me, you know, are we talking about raw games or are we talking about qualified games? You know, how do you start to approach that in your thinking and you know, in really presenting analysis in this game?
Yeah. So sorry, real quick, just to answer the question that was just put up on screen there, asking about going first or going second. I just pulled the numbers. First place right now has a 51% win rate if you're the attacking player. So it you know, that margin did narrow from 53 to 51. Great spot to be in, but it is technically better to be going first. Okay, so to your point of, if I can draw a parallel for people that have played 40K, Imperial Knights always felt like that army that was really good. If you were 3-3, Imperial Knights was going to crush. But Imperial Knights never, you know, went 3-0 because they always got stopped by somebody. And so they were a dominant mid to low table army and not so much at the top end. I'm going to go back to Kane again. It's why I'm still worried about Kane, because I feel like Kane in the right person's hands is frightening. I think Butcher in the right person's hand, Decathus in the right person's hands is very, very scary. Old Umbre really gets me there. I think Yana, Aslanov, Morzov, little lesser, but I feel like those armies in the right player's hands are very scary. And so, yeah, no, I think you're always going to have a case where there is a top table meta and a mid table meta. And generally, there should be different. I feel like if they're the same, you kind of have some issues. The other parallel I'll use real quick is League of Legends. I don't know if you watch or play any League of Legends.
Yeah.
I don't play, but I watch pros. It's like it's one of my sports that I watch. And it's funny to hear people talk about games. Garen, right? Garen in the top lane. He's actually seen play in the last couple of years in some comps, but Garen's the king of bronze and silver or whatever. But pro players don't play him very often. They play stuff that's way different. And so those top tables should be a little bit more unique.
This may be like some ancient, I don't know how relevant this is nowadays, but I always used to use a league example too of like this sort of problem, like way back in the day, like 2011, 2012, Tristana was almost impossible to balance because in her existing form, like in casual, she was awful. In competitive, she was like unbelievably dominant. And, that's always going to be a challenge with this game. Is that you sort of have to release rule sets for the entire market. But
if you have hands, she's amazing. I don't have hands, and so don't worry about me playing Tristana. I'm trying to think. Like I said, Kane's the one that jumps out to me, right? Like mid-level tables, he dies. Top-level tables, he shouldn't. Theoretically, your opponent should be that much better on a top table, but if your caster is always 2 inches further back than you think they need to be, at the top table, that player is very quickly going to say, I can't do this, or it's going to take way too long for me to try it, and the percentages just are not there. Playing Lilith, I think, is also a mid-table Lilith shoots you and does stuff. Top table Lilith is frightening. Peyton Priest beat me. He ended up with a heavy that walked forward, shot twice, had side steps on both of them. Not side steps. What's the one that triggers off for range attacks?
Oh, Swift Hunters. Yeah.
He had Swift Hunters, and then did he also have side steps? He moved 2 or 3 times.
I think you can have, don't quote me on this, but I think you can have a Hydrix that has Swift Hunter and Overtake.
Maybe that's what it was. But he got him to my caster and he got me. And it was kind of coin flippy, but I was on the other side of a forest and I went down to 0 camp because I thought, well, I'm behind this forest. He can't see me. There's no way he gets in here. And then he la-di-da'd his way in there and off I went.
Oh.
I'm trying to think of other examples that would be a big disparity between top and middle.
Well, I'm thinking, I'm thinking we'll set old Umbre to the side for now, because I feel like the faction has attenuated a lot better this year. They're still viable, they're still strong, but like they're not as polarized in terms of play environment as they used to be. Something that occurs to me right away with Gravediggers, particularly Kane, and with Lilith in Shadowflame is multiple opportunities for movement is also a massive territory for skill expression. and can be like really challenging to deal with somebody who's got it dialed in. Because Lilith, in addition to Swift Hunters and Overtakes and Slipstream and all this stuff, has battle group run and gun, which means this entire battle group can activate. Like Lilith can slide 7 inches sideways, pop some shots, and keep going 7 inches sideways, and then the Wyvern can activate and slide 7 and then 7 more, and like this army can be nowhere near where it started, having done a ton of work. And Kane's big trick is like, I'm gonna untap, I'm gonna kill a billion things, or I'm gonna put a damage buff on something, do some warm up, and I'm gonna be on the other side of the board. Like I'm gonna completely change theaters of engagement, having done a ton of work.
Lilith also has Slipstream, right?
Mm-hmm.
Another significant skill expression item. Talking to an opponent with the shades, being able to slipstream one of the models and then deadeye each of them.
Oh,
and
God.
Then your key guy walks, places 4. And then with the deadeye, you're throwing 4 dice at the caster to hit him, and
right.
then 3 dice damage. And even that was like, oh, okay, I have to camp 2. Because between Slipstream and the placement and the dead eyes, you can affect the math and the distance in such a way that I can't go naked. And if you don't get that, don't see that, and you bring Helith up and you leave her on empty, she's dead. And there's a lot of other casters that fall into that same bucket. So that's another movement skill expression that you're going to see at the top tables with those angles that when you're playing your games at home, if you don't have that top level shard player, you're just not going to think about those angles, and then you kind of get surprised.
Right. And that play, like, you like, oh, Slipstream and Deadeye 3 times. I'm like, that's moving that unit a long ways. They're super accurate. That I think is another element that that is just good in any metagame, but really enables skilled high mastery players is big plays that are low commit. Because that's only 4 fury. Like Lilith can still like boost a hit, or have like some floating camp or whatever. Like that's not really any skin off her nose. Like she's not going for a bananas play that turn necessarily, but she's keeping perfectly safe and doing perfectly adequate work, and she has a good deal of positioning freedom, but she's just enabled an aspect of your army for like a not terribly expensive amount of her stack to do all this work. And once you see that can happen, the threat of that happening for low commit every turn like actually turns into a bit of a nightmare for you, the opponent, right?
Yeah, because you want to be putting models places. Let me use Kruger as an easy example. We don't have to be talking about your Warcaster. Mm-hmm. If you've got Kruger who wants to be mid-table hiding behind a forest where normally he's safe, and the shades can place 4, and that gives them an angle to see him where otherwise you wouldn't normally be able to, the Kruger's dead. And yeah, the opportunity cost to kill Kruger may not be that high. It is a couple fury, but the shades are probably not in a spot where you can even counter them. And then where it gets really scary is if you are playing a Magnus and Invictus, right? Magnus can be nowhere near anything within 4 inches of him that they could possibly bounce a shot off of, or he's dead and you lose Invictus for free. Mm-hmm. And so it changes the way that skill expression from the Lilith opponent makes you change the way you play the game completely, and you have to play a lot more scared, which gives them so much more advantage. We already talked about Lilith being pressured on scenario, and she doesn't want that. And this is another way that she pushes you off to make sure that she has the room and space to pepper you down and not lose on scenario. It's she can create some really difficult positions.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and this is, I'm sure we could like pop open the War Machine app and spend 2 hours just going through casters and evaluating this. But like it seems to me like the elements of like consistent metagame winners are this movement as avenue for skill expression, disproportionate threat weighting for low commits. Like Kane is the king of low commit plays because he teleports out. Like you make sure he has a gate crasher buddy, kills that, and then he's like, and I'm applying my 3-cost offensive debuff, or I'm putting a bunch of shots down range, and like it costs me nothing to do this. In terms of my overall game plan. Or like Firequill, like he's sort of Timu Kane because he's slower and he only has repo 3, but like Firequill is desperate for outlets for his fury. I've played a ton of Firequill games where I'm like, I get to the end of his activation, I'm like, I guess I throw away 3.
Oh no.
Like just to have room for the beast, but like essentially every play Firequill makes is like low resource commit for you because it's like he just gets to do things and not die, and doing things doesn't even necessarily cost him his camp meaningfully. So like the last element I think that sort of gets pointed to by these low commit plays is optionality. And I think that's what gives like Firequill, Kane, Lilith real enduring staying power, is the list can be unpacked and played in a variety of ways. You're not wedded to a particular way of doing things, and you can sort of mode switch on the fly, right? Which is also a skill expression outlet versus there are some other casters, they aren't coming to mind, but these definitely exist. Like casters that are so locked in on their shtick, like pre-committed. I do this one thing. It's very, very powerful when it comes off, but like essentially there's not room to adapt. And like, boy, it's good if that works, but it ain't so good if it doesn't. Those casters may be good in a given metagame, but I don't necessarily think they're going to have like the same enduring impact.
When I think to think about maybe Decathus and Butcher, going back to them, if the idea is that they are meatballs and they need to sit mid-table, that's going to be a pretty consistent game plan. You need to be careful to not put them so mid-table that they do die, but otherwise they're very durable pieces. Now, the other thing is, I'm not saying that there's not a ton of skill expression in the way you place your models, or with the Necrofactorium list, the way you cover up your caster with the Colossal, with the void plates.
Right.
That can be very, very impactful.
And who's leading for who too? Because sometimes it's Decathus screens for the Colossal, and sometimes it's the Colossal screens for Decathus.
Yeah. And then Butcher obviously has he has options to take his guard dog guy for 4 points, and how you place all that can be very, very specific and very careful. Gosh, there's been so many games with Moraine where I've just been like, what if I just full camped and just ran somewhere and just hung out? She's a 15, 17 camping 6. How much would that change the way this game plays? But regardless, I think there is room for some of those lists to be powerful, albeit straightforward. Clearly, Routh made his mark on us, even though he played a very deliberate list. He played a deliberate list that nobody saw coming. And so it wasn't very deliberate at all in the end.
Right. Well, I think so. There's 2 more things that I think are worth drawing attention to in this metagame snapshot. Sort of the last one that's really construction based is partner lists. So we've talked about the big metagame terrorists, and it actually turns out they have a lot of freedom for partner lists. Andy Bev on your show explained a lot of his rationale for Boomhowler as partner to Firequill. I mean, Andy almost seems to feel like Boomhowler is the major partner, but they're both very potent. Shadow Tongue is sort of always there waiting in the wings. I think Boggity Bomb is like a great partner. But then you have Kishtar, Butcher is a great partner, especially if you're building a more restrained list. Akers was running Sabrith as his partner. Lilith is like wide open for pairings. Like sort of the one restriction on her is like maybe don't play Valix because they essentially try to run the same plan. But like I think where we're at in the development cycle is okay, we figured out which boogeymen have staying power and which don't. And I think we're starting to put language to why. And then what we're going to see over the next 5 to 7 months is like the partner list that's also terrifying level up.
Yeah. Remind me, in Shard, Valix is he the one with the crit feet?
Yeah. Feet is hits always crit.
Okay. Funny enough, that was the one loss that Ralph had on the weekend was to Valix.
Oh, into Valix. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because like everything we've described, one of the games we covered on stream at Captain Con was Derek Senstrom playing Mike Ireland, and Derek was running Valix. And it was really funny because a lot of the things we just said about Lilith, you watched Derek do with Valix. It's like, okay, I'm going to come in, I'm going to take these targets, and I'm going to disappear. The difference is like the stick I'm hitting you with, which is in melee, but like the distance I'm away from you is not that much different at all.
Yeah.
So maybe don't play the two of them together because they're sort of in the same space, but like wide open field. I think of the persistent boogeymen, Kane is probably the most restrained because Gravediggers essentially has the same caster printed 4 times, which is I offer mild board control. I bring a damage buff. Like pick whichever version of this same stick you like most.
Yeah. Yeah, Hasker's good. He seems to be the best second, but
but he's not a world beater in his own right. And like if we're looking at those elements of like maximum skill expression leverage, he kind of doesn't have it, nor do any of the other ones. I mean, Keith's probably going to disagree with me about Sparkhammer, but
Sparkhammer has some unique angles that nobody's pursuing, so I think that there is opportunity there too.
Yeah, and then Sparkhammer can be built quite different. So I guess on the technical and construction levels of this metagame snapshot, do you have any other thoughts before I think we move on to the crazy elephant in the room?
No, I mean you're right. The pairs are going to change and you're off list because if you're bringing that gun line and the meta starts to evolve. We'll go back to the easy example that we've drawn with Decathus and Butchers. If you end up with a lot more of those just running at you, then you're going to have to evolve your second list pair. And then when those players start to play into that and they start to see Decathus more than Sepsira, where they were expecting the Sepsira, then they're going to have to, it becomes a meta evolution to a meta evolution to a meta evolution. That's kind of what I feel like, to your point. We were in the wild west in the beginning of the year, and then the middle of the year does feel like it's that meta answer to the meta answer to the meta answer as we kind of evolve through the summer, and then you come out with okay, I think this is the end times and the list you need to play for the WTC and everything.
Man, my mind
elephant in the room.
Oh, go ahead. Other elephant in the room. Biggest meta determinant: being good at this game. It's more than being good. It's also being consistent because like you can randomly scroll to any portion of the Adepticon standings and see like, holy crap, Rick Coe went 0-2. Like, Rich Loxham is, pretty pretty middle of the road here, and he won the first qualifier of 2026, like, you know,
Yeah.
CEO of the company. You know, there's you down here, and like, you know, 3-3 is replete with bodies of like absolutely amazing players. But you know, if I'm looking at like the 5-1s and better, I'm looking at like, oh, I see Dan Riker, I see Brandon Owens, I see Peyton Priest, I see Brad Park, and like these are, you know, these players are obviously good, but these are also some of the most consistent players I've ever seen. Like, these are not, oh, Eric Akers, these are not mistake makers.
Right.
You know, so we could have grabbed like samplings from anywhere on this and peppered them in the top 9, but you know, the big thing I see is consistency partnered with maximal skill expression. So it's like for me, the other elephant in the room is like, you know, obviously not just who's good at this game, but you know, who's seeing where the winding path is actually leading, you know?
Yeah. I hear you on the people in the middle, but when you have that many good players in the room,
Right.
they knock each other out, and it just kind of is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And that's tough. That's why I highlighted in the beginning the path that Andy took to get to
Mm-hmm.
the victory is round 1 he played locks, round 2 he played JVM.
Yeah.
Right? Those are the 2 rounds that you're hoping to get a little bit easier matchups. And he went from hard to worse, and then, you know, still had to then beat everybody else that was 2, 3-0, 4-0, 5-0. That's tough. So yeah, I mean, so many good players in a room. You still would kind of expect everyone to be 4-2, not 3-3 as much. But
Mm-hmm.
when you find another shark at the, you know, the 3-2 bracket, and one of you ends up being 4-2, and then the other one of you 3-3, it's tough.
Yeah.
I think there's just a good number of really solid players right now, right?
Yeah.
Maybe a small question back to you, because you know this better than I do. In Mark II, I felt like we had like an S tier of players that
Mm-hmm.
was thin, right? And you know, it was our WTC 1 and 2 teams.
Mm-hmm.
And I leave it at that because we only had 2 teams back then, and the player base was 3 times as big as it is now. And so to take that top 10 layers, right? Like, I feel like we only lost to each other.
Mm-hmm.
Now I feel like the S tier might be thinner, but that A tier, A plus tier feels pretty big. Is that right?
That's my impression as well. You know, I've definitely played in both environments, and I played in like the middle of this story. So like I think your characterization of like, you know, it was people like you and Keith Christensen and Jake Van Meter, and you know, there was this you know, rogues gallery of like ultra consistent players, and like you'd look at qualifiers and like, oh, Ryan won that one, and Pagani won that one, and that one.
Yeah.
You know, and then you know, a bunch of folks stepped away from the game except for Jake, who is eternal. It was interesting for me because that's the meta I really came up in, you know, competitively, and boy, it was hard cracking the top when like the opposition was specifically very stiff players. And then Mark III, you know, there were the Rogues Gallery didn't have as many legacy names in it necessarily. And the game definitely had a thinning out player base. Like recruiting was, you know, dropped off a cliff in Mark III. The game was inaccessible, difficult to find at retailers.
Yeah.
But the players who stuck around got really, really hardcore about it. And you know, it was not uncommon for me to go to qualifiers for like less the pandemic time, but for several years straight, and be like, there's maybe like 16 people here, but like 12 to 15 of them are stone cold killers who have been on this grind for years.
Yeah.
I think, like in Mark 3, we got this, like not a ton of people survived Mark 3 and played continuously through it, but the people who did came out as a pretty tight cluster of hard asses. And now I think what you're seeing is like a reunion of the Mark 2 and Mark 3 metas into this very, very competitive Mark 4 meta. And now we start looking at very odd differentiating factors, because like this is a Shark Tank. 80 people showed up. It was like, like the vast majority of it was a mix of S tier through A minus.
Yeah.
So like in a game that's becoming that competitive, I'm like, for me, and why I ask about this is I'm looking for like, okay, what are the differentiators? And I think, there's obviously skill, but there's skill to go around, consistency, and then vision, i.e. seeing where the metagame's going, seeing what gives the greatest avenues for success at the level you're intending to play at. So that's sort of what I'm looking for. And like, I do kind of wish for the Mark II metagame where we had like 3 years to figure this out, because I think at like 7 months, we will have only started to really grasp the extent of vision and consistency in this metagame. And then we're going to get the whole thing taken away from us and have to do it again.
Yeah, it's all going to start over. The other thing is, even as you talk about the beginning, middle, end of the year, last year obviously was my first year back to the game. Mm-hmm. And I got to watch the game evolve with new releases. Kane was a new release, Kythos was a new release, and then towards the end of the year, Old Umbre. Well, then Gravediggers came out, but Kane was impactful. I would say Gravediggers as a whole, outside of your Brandon Owens, was a little tougher. But Umbre, immediate effect. Mm-hmm. And so we haven't even yet seen necessarily what this year has to, in store for us. We've got Kithgard coming out. We were told on the AMA that Dusk and Orgoth are supposed to get new casters, a 6th caster for each sooner than later, I believe. That was the AMA that went on during Adepticon. Mm-hmm. So they're supposed to get casters, and I think the quote was sooner than later. So God knows where that stuff's all gonna end up. I don't know what's gonna happen. Does War Table help even out having a lot of players clustered around that A rank, because everybody can get games consistently with all the other players, and it creates a kind of a homogenization?
That's interesting. I think it certainly does. Because if you look at like the North American War Machine League that the Bevs and Tyrants on the Field put together, it's a lot of this competitive population. Like the A through S ranks are all in there pretty regularly. Mm-hmm. I haven't played in it in a long while, but there's also a European league that contains, many of the top American players plus, many of the top European players. I think there is a more common like there's almost like regionality almost matters a little bit less than it used to in terms of like idiosyncrasy. Because it used to be like the East Coast and the West Coast guys had very different metas from the Midwest guys, and the kinds of things you would see, like, trans-regional tournaments like Adepticon were the one time a year you actually got to see these different regional expressions. And now, like, if you're quick enough on the draw in the league thing, like, you can see it pretty regularly if you want to.
Yeah, I mean, to continue with the Mark II parallels, when I started the game, I was in Phoenix.
Mhm.
And Phoenix, we had a Shark Tank. For those that remember the name Jason Flanzer, Jason
Yep.
won the first lock and load. That sounds right.
Yeah,
First lock and load Masters.
Mhm.
I won the second one. And so it was kind of Jason and I, but like our whole community was incredible.
Right. Yeah,
And
you
then
had
we had
guys like
Southern Cal.
Brian Marino and Dan Yount and stuff like that,
Yep.
like who
They were
became sort of living legends in their own right toward the end of the edition.
well, and the joke was that Jason was my War Machine father, and then Brian Marino was my War Machine apprentice. And so like the joke was always to Brian that, well, Jason won the first lock and load and Ryan won the second one. So Brian, it's your turn. You know, please continue with the family legacy and go win this 128 person steamroller. And with obviously an impossible task.
Oh, shoot.
No, am I back there?
I don't know what happened. I don't know if I accidentally smashed something or if
No, my cat's chewing on the wire.
Oh, sure.
I don't know if it disconnected.
Of course she
okay,
is.
but if you can hear me now. So we had generations of teacher, student. And so the Phoenix meta was huge. Then I moved to Dallas. Obviously Pagani and his whole group out of Houston were, relatively close. And then Dallas, we had a good meta ourselves. And so, yeah, you had these very specific pockets of players. Look at John Damaris and the Muse crew in Iowa, right? And these guys were all fantastic because they just fed on each other, steel sharpened steel.
Right.
I think that's part of why you had a more limited group of S tier players. I feel like your more outliers were like a Brian White in Atlanta. I don't know who Brian was grinding against. Brian was just insane at this game. He was incredible. But now, like I said, everybody gets to hop on the online league and you get to see a greater depth and breadth of the entire, say, US meta.
Right. You definitely do get to do that. I mean, I don't know if we've talked about this before. I've had some people violently disagree with me about this, and some people violently agree. War table is not the same as real life. And a little bit too much war table, I find, can go too far. Mayhew Bunting, another old school War Machine name. Welcome, Mayhew. The Florida meta, geographically very, very remote, but that probably is the answer to who Brian White was grinding against.
I will say, though Travis Marge has always carried the mantle of the ATC, I was on the WTC committee when we created that. We kind of came up with the idea at the same time, and Marge was the organizer. So, Travis, have at it. But we made that first ATC. The team that won got to go to the WTC. And I believe it was the Florida meta where they had a lot of good players that maybe individually weren't cracking that S tier consistently, but operated very well together. And I think that was one of the initial intentions. And maybe the Florida guys ended up winning that first event in, I think, 2017. And so the Florida team, I expect, went to the WTC that year. I think that was probably my last event of War Machine that I ever played back then. But the ATC was initially set up so that one of these metas could send a team and go.
Right. Yeah. Oh man. Yeah. It would be interesting to be in that sort of world again. It's always hard because the WTC is such a big logistical undertaking. And I know, even teams that have won ATC have sometimes had to shed a player because they went the distance, but guy number 5 can't necessarily make it, that sort of thing. It would be interesting to see and man, it's like qualification time throughout the year is also really awkward, but it would be interesting to see like a parallel universe where like, the USA was all team tournament qualify in teams. That would certainly be an interesting world. And I don't know that we've gotten so post geographic that it wouldn't be 3 local metas going, every time, or 3 extended metas.
That makes sense.
2019 and returning to the steel sharpened steel, this was before the advent of play online. One of my big level up years was 2019 for the WTC, and that was all West Coast guys, like mostly based out of California. And I think at least Brandon and I traveled the most, but like our team went to so many qualifiers. Brandon and I were hopping on a plane to play at an event, something like every 2 weeks that year.
Oh my God. That's a heavy commitment.
Yeah. But it was also, that was the year where I auto lost a Crucible guard. So it was not necessarily great being on the same plane with Brandon going to events every 2 weeks.
That's a bummer.
But it was that like crazy consistent repetition, just built us up so fast. I will say one big difference between that sort of steel sharpened steel experience and a war table experience. War table's great for getting games, it's great for getting exposure, but like there's something that like a con like Adepticon or even a local steamroller does that like a league won't, which is play a game, learn your lessons. Okay, you have 5 minutes. You are going to iterate immediately and play another game. And like, you're really compounding the learning and firing and firing and firing. And like, it builds you so fast.
And then you're going to go to dinner, have 3 beers, wake up the next morning and do it again.
Right. Yeah. Oh man, I used to hear legends of the so that's another thing about Adepticon that's like maybe metagame snapshot, and an interesting one is the 5-round day, or you've played 6-round days, right?
I mean, back in the day,
those are the old ways. We haven't had like 5-6-round days in a long time.
Well, and for education from back Mark 2, when we had really big events, there was always a Masters, and a Masters was 8 players that played on Sunday. The way you got into Masters is you had to win one of what was usually 4 individual events. So there was like a steamroller on Friday and then a mangled metal Friday night. So you'd play a 5-round steamroller or 6 rounds on Friday, and then people would stay and play more games until 1 or 2 a.m. to try to get that other Masters spot. And then if you got it on day 1, you usually relaxed on Saturday and then played the finals on Sunday. But it was always a day tournament, and then like a tournament that started at 7 p.m. And War Machine was crazy. It's a lot.
Yeah.
Long days.
People forget about the War Machine endurance sports aspect of it, like I think I won an Iron Gauntlet qualifier in, I forget which year. It was one of the years with like the funky like cut to top 4 and rebuild your list thing. And I think it was like, because that essentially staples on an extra round based on your tournament time. I think it was like I was playing round 7 and the game was starting at like 11:30 at night. And like massive endurance competition. I'm so tired. My opponent's so tired. I'm like, you put Siphon within 19 inches of Sorsha. Like, do you have shield guards? Nah, dog. Do you have immunity to stationary or knockdown? Nope. Like, do you have shield guards? My opponent just stops me. He's like, I'm tired. I effed up. Just kill me.
Just do it. I remember 2 iron. I won 2 Iron Gauntlet qualifiers, right? Because back in the day, the Invitational was the thing that primarily mattered.
Yeah, they only got fused recently, but we had like dual circuits, which was weird to explain to people.
Yeah, but there were two events where like I flew in for I did this twice. I flew in for an Iron Gauntlet, won it, flew home. But like that's fly in on Friday night, play all day Saturday, you're right, till 10 or 11 p.m. and then
Mhm.
fly home Sunday morning.
Mhm.
Which was like insanity. I just like I can't believe I YOLO'd going to win an event in one day just to fly home the next morning. Like it worked, but I'm still a crazy person.
Right, yeah. No, yeah, we definitely got a lot more leisurely over time, and I think like the convention style qualify into masters was like, the first step, and then like we iterated to a lot more like standalone events where we could do 2 days and really pace it out. But like, man, nothing really prepares you for like if you're used to that leisurely style, and like the WTC is a leisurely style too, because you're like 3 rounds Saturday, 3 rounds Sunday, and you get like an hour and change in between. Like,
Yeah.
I'll go get my feet rubbed, like, I'll go take a nice shower. Like, you got all the time in the world.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily like an Adepticon where like your feet are hurting, your back is hurting, like your sinuses are dried up. Did you ever attend one of these? I'd heard legends that the Houston crew used to run preparation for Endurance Sports War Machine by Will opening up the shop at like midnight, and they'd all go in, like slam 2 beers and then play a game just to like simulate that level of exhaustion.
If it happened, I was never aware of it. And I was friends with all those guys, so I think I would have been aware, but
Okay, so maybe
insane.
it's just urban legend, but it sounds like the kind of thing you would do to prepare for a round 5.
Well, I think we were just more used to it. Here's the other thing I want to add. Just for everybody's purposes, having the YouTube channel, you can see who your user base is, right? And I need to put this up on screen sometime on mine, but most of my listener base, it's like 58% is like in their 40s, or like it's 38 to 48 maybe is what it is. 10 years, like I'm in that age bracket, you're in that age bracket, or forgive me, Alex, I don't know, you might be a little younger than that, but 10 years ago we were all 10 years younger. Like the player population seems to have aged with the identical amount of time. And so yeah, I was more able to play 6 rounds when I was 34 than I am now at 44.
Right.
I don't want to play 6 rounds right now. I can't. There's no way I would play 5 rounds and then consider signing up for hardcore because I'm just that thirsty, right? Like, there's no way. I just don't have the stamina for it. I'm crotchety and I want to go to bed, and I'm answering work emails while I'm doing the whole thing. Like, it's just no.
Oh man, well we gotta find them youngins and make them hungry so we can live vicariously. I tell you what,
they can play in the evening events.
If you want to see somebody who's like taking tournament consistently seriously, like try and find Brandon between rounds at events. Like it was very easy at Cascadia in Washington because it's just a fairgrounds. Like you can see basically everybody. But like he'd be we were playing in these barns, he'd be out behind the barn every round, like having a stretch, having a water, taking a breather, like eating a handful of nuts. Like, oh, you really are treating this like you're prepared to go the distance here. My fat ass is just like sitting there chain smoking and like complaining about my back.
I'm not as bad on the chain smoking, but there's never have I been as diligent as Brandon. I didn't realize that. I mean, like, pack a protein bar in my bag, sure. Make sure I get a water in between rounds, but I have a tiny bladder, and there were so many games where we would start the round timer and I'd tap to my opponent's clock and be like, I have to run to the restroom. And so I never drank enough water. I always had headaches. It was terrible. Yeah. I didn't want to run to the bathroom.
You're also like 8'7", so having to lean over a table all day is harder.
I do sit a lot more now, whereas I used to just like hover over the table the whole time. So no, I try to sit a lot more. I'm
Yeah.
not as much of a hawk as I used to be.
Man, that would be an interesting one. I feel like we've touched on so much in this episode that I probably want to like spin out into other topics. But we are closing in real quick on time. Maybe someday, like, you know, how to play endurance sports War Machine from the old heads. But I want to give you the last word on this. Any final thoughts on Adepticon and where we've come over the last 3 months, and you know, if you've, you know, if you feel like you can peer through the mist and say where we're going.
Oh God. Firstly, Adepticon was a ton of fun. Everybody was great. I'm still kind of meeting everybody, right? Because I've been back for a year, and or you know, getting to see people for the second or third time at this point, and that's where you start to get a little bit more comfortable. So Adepticon for me was absolutely brilliant from that perspective. Anybody that's thinking about going to one of these big conventions, just go. It's a fun time. It is better if you can go with a buddy, just on the basis of, you know, being able to, you know, split a room and get dinner and all that stuff. But everybody's always incredibly friendly. It's great. Adepticon Meta was obviously fantastic. It was tough. God, where do I see the meta going? I'm worried about. I'm wondering if so. Umbre has had a kind of a 55% win rate, not seeing a lot of podium spots. I wonder if we start to see that uptick. Maybe as some of these extreme range lists come down, because that's what they were a little bit more afraid of. I think Old Umbre still has a lot of upward room. So they're kind of my maybe principal boogeyman. What I'm really curious of is, and this is a weakness of mine because I've only been back for the last year, Infernals, Dark Ops, Crucible Guard, Convergence, and Grimkin, right, are all going to be printable here very soon, or it is now, I guess. And we're going to start to see those factions show up in bigger numbers.
Right.
Infernals had a 60% win rate, and then Grimkin and Convergence were at 55%. Those are like big win percentages.
We haven't even begun to see the final form of Grimkin, and I feel like that faction is going to be bananas now with their Build-A-Bearer feats.
And then Convergence has a lot of really solid tools, and then Infernals have been like a perennial 60% win rate for as long as I've played this game. The data coming out of Adepticon on Infernals was insane. Agathon was played 55 times out of 57. That's nuts. So that's really my read on the meta is I have no idea, because we're going to get a flood of new models. Well, they're not new models, they exist, but we saw big rules changes for Convergence and Grimkin, and they're going to be widely available. And then Dark Ops is supposed to be getting a fourth caster. That could be huge for them. I guess Crucible Guard lags all the other ones, but that's a massive infusion.
Yeah. I mean, I think CG got a big bump when they came back, first being 3D or being back on the block and getting new rules, and then they got their wings clipped a bit in January. You know, it's very good to call out, like, you know, because all those are things we didn't really see. And, you know, we talk about the discovery period, like people figuring out second lists when they're wide open. We didn't even touch on at all that Brad Park was playing Cephalix, came in second. And if Brad's playing a faction and piloting it to results, it's probably terrifyingly good.
Yeah. And it's all Thexus.
All Thexus all the time.
Yeah. So yeah, you have to have a plan for Thexus. And right now, Plan Dodge is probably fine. In a month or two from now, right? That's the thing, is more people are going to get their hands on these models, And now that he's also demonstrated a list, it's going to get copied more. And so that's going to be for me a just major shakeup in the meta is what these guys are going to do.
Yeah. That's a really interesting direction to take it. Like the vision is hard to see because we know there's much we haven't seen yet. And between you and me, I know a lot of players who finished high up are also jumping on Kithgard. So
oh really?
Oh yeah.
That's another one, right? Like I've played against Kithgard once. Matt was kind enough to play me at Adepticon, and it was wonderful to see his army on the table. What an incredible painter. And the things that he does for War Machine, absolutely incredible. In my opinion, this game is in very good hands. But yeah, one game is not enough, not yet. So that's a lot of new models.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think my tiny bladder is starting to act up now too. So thank you, Ryan, for being on with us. Thanks everyone in chat for joining us. And Keith, take us away.